Starting now. Yes. So welcome everyone. Melissa Wetzel here, AFP Miami president. So glad to have you here with Dr. Michael Moody. Michael, thank you so much for being a part of it. Could you please give us a quick synopsis of the book?
Okay, I'll try to be quick so that we can have a good conversation. So the book really starts from the premise that we know a whole lot, that first of all, that major donors are important and becoming even more important in the world. You all know this as fundraisers. And I don't know if you saw the Generosity Commission report that everybody's been waiting on came out yesterday. And it, once again, sort of confirmed this idea that the mix of donors, because of wealth concentration and the wealth transfer and all the things that are happening, the mix of donors means relatively major donors have a much bigger role to play for every nonprofit. And so we know a lot about older donors that are major donors. But we really knew very little before this book about younger major donors and those that are the chief beneficiaries, for example, of the wealth transfer, right? Because we say there's a wealth transfer going on that's of historic proportions, but then that's within families, mostly high net worth families. But who's that being transferred to? Gen Xers and millennials and now Gen Z in those families. And so we just didn't know. That was the problem that we started the book with. We just didn't know who these folks are. So that's why we did the research. And before we started recording, we talked a little bit about what we did in the research. So I won't go back into that. But what we found was in short a couple of things. One is that there is a revolution going on that's being sort of pushed by these next generation folks, and we focused on younger Gen Xers and millennials. We would probably include some of the older Gen Zers now, but the idea was they are in fact changing the world of philanthropy, and they are doing so in ways that everybody has to pay attention to. That's really the big punchline for the book for fundraisers is these generation of major donors, because they're going to be so significant, they are going to change the job quite a bit. And there's a big adaptation that needs to happen. And so but the question was, what is that revolution and how do you have to change? We found that it's not a revolution in the what of philanthropy, that is the issues that people want to give to. They still want to give to basic needs and education and the arts and other things. There are some differences, but for the most part, that's pretty similar to older major donors. It's not a revolution of the why, about the motives or why they feel like being a donor is important. There's very similar answers to other surveys and other things on major donors. The revolution is, if it's not what or why, it's a revolution in how. They want to do things differently in terms of how they give the money. They want to take more risks. They want to try new strategies. They want to use more than just the traditional tools. They want to, do their investing differently, all sorts of other things to align their social benefit with their assets and their values. And then they also, though, even though so that's the first part of the book is what they want to change. They want to give with their peers. They want to take risks. They want to try new strategies. They're obsessed with finding impact, seeing the impact, right? That's why we call them Generation Impact. But then the second part of the book is, in some ways, what's not changing as much, and that is they still want to give with the older generations. The myth of the next generation is that they want to, like the relay race myth, that they want to take the baton and leave the old generation in the dust. They don't really want that. They want to be on a multi-generational team, giving and being mentored by older generations. They value the legacy for those who are in legacy giving families. They value that legacy. They want to be better stewards, even if that means doing things in dramatically different ways to advance the legacy. They still want to be part of that legacy. And they really take their identity seriously, their own learning seriously. So trying to fight away some of the myths that people have of younger folks and younger donors. So those are really the two big messages of the book is there's a revolution that's here, and there's a revolution in strategy and innovation and risk. And there's the revolutionaries, though, we can live with them because they still give based on their values. They still like legacy, and they still want to work with the older generations. So, and we have a whole bunch of recommendations, which we can get into that come out of that for fundraisers.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. Thank you for that, guys. We're gonna open it up. So really for the group tonight, just want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing within your organizations, what you're seeing in the space overall. And Michael, of course, is going to chime in throughout. But we want to start with just some quick level setting here. So next gen encompasses Gen X, which is 1965 to 1980, and millennials 1980 through 1995. Basically, it's a 30-year spread. So we're talking about the youngest in this group is 29, the eldest is 59 this year. So just to start off with, what drew you specifically to this topic, and what did you hope to learn from the book about next gen donors?
I don't mind weighing in. I think
Thank
for
you.
me, I mean, at, at Camilla's house, particularly, a lot of our donors are older, but we're starting to see the younger generation become more engaged. And so for us, it made sense to embark more on planned giving efforts to capitalize on or to engage with our donors at that giving level, but then to learn new strategies to really better target and better steward this next generation of donors that we all know are coming around the corner. So what we as an organization can do to appeal to them, I think, was the biggest attention or reason why I really wanted to join in on the fun today.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Julie, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, similar to Christine, but in our case, we obviously were helping students, so that we start with them in high school through college, and then of course they're alumni. And for all intents and purposes, we have an alumni program, but it's one-sided. We give to them, like we ask them, here's workshops, here's materials, here's resources. But, since I've arrived, we've had to start now asking them to pay it forward. And so that's kind of where I was at. But, at the same time, what we offer is a little bit more expensive. We have scholarship amounts that are locked in. So, how do these folks feel that they're making an impact when the dollar amount is so high? Per student, per scholarship. And I've tried to break it apart, but then you can't guarantee that the student will have access to the scholarship for all 4 years. That's the whole point. Without that, they won't finish. So just trying to think of different things and, understand the psychology and the mindset behind that. And unlike Christine, I haven't gotten to the point of plan giving. I feel like maybe we can tackle this a little bit more easily. Plan giving takes a little bit more time. But yeah, so that's kind of where I was at, just trying to understand the mindset and the motivations.
Thanks. Jody or Larry, I don't know if you want to chime in here.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think one of the things that is a challenge for us at the Everglades Foundation and that interests me is looking at the differences or segmenting the next generation between high capacity wealth, people taking over their family foundations versus working professionals who are more to the low to mid-level donors who are looking for engagement, even volunteer opportunities to get their hands dirty with the cause. And how do you treat those two segmented groups differently in terms of engagement?
Yeah. So one of the next questions here. So next gen donors expect to see the impact of their giving, but some organizations are working on social changes that are harder to see or won't be visible until the end stages of a long, successful progression. What will the next gen's call for seeing impact mean for those organizations? Jody, I'm curious if you can actually take this one with the Everglades. Obviously, you've got a big goal to tackle here that's supporting, all of Florida's drinking water and so much more. So I wonder if maybe you want to talk about this question.
Sure, yeah, it's a great one for us because, this is a 30-year project. It's not a quick turnaround. And, we have markers of progress, but our organization is primarily a science-based organization. So we have scientists doing the work. We have an advocacy arm trying to secure the government funding for all the infrastructure projects. It's just a very complex topic, and our role in it is not a very traditional nonprofit role. So the challenge of being able to measure progress over a long period and having those smaller inches of progress be enough. We have an education arm, pre-K through 12, so that's helpful because that we can.
Jody, I'm sorry, did
Small, but over a great period of time. So that is a challenge.
I'm so sorry. I missed that last bit because my internet froze, but you were talking about the education arm.
We do have a pre-K through 12 education program.
Yeah.
So the markers of progress for that are a little bit easier to track, but the Everglades restoration itself is a challenge.
What are some of the ways, Jody, that you currently showcase the impact? Like part of what the next gen donors, they want to see impact, but impact is defined in so many different ways. So what are some of the different ways that you actually hit showcasing that impact over time?
Well, we have diversified, unlike some environmental organizations, while, wildlife and conservation is a huge part of what we do, we've expanded to be able to show the impact to the economy. South Florida has a water-based tourism economy. If the water quality is bad or we have issues with it, it affects hotels, boating, all of those things. So we've hired a chief economist, and he's working with a group of colleagues at universities to track economic impact for us, and that has resonated a lot in Florida. And then we also track what's the other area? Quality of life, drinking water. There's various ways of looking at it beyond the traditional environmental wildlife perspective.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome, Jody. Thank you. Curious if anyone else around the room has any thoughts on this particular question. So if you have a mission that it's more difficult to see, what are some different ways that you approach impact?
So we have two sides. So obviously, the student gets a scholarship and, they work with their volunteers, and then you can track the student's progress. So that part is easy. But I think it's capturing the relationship with the mentor. And so we've been just focusing a lot on storytelling. I mean, you can track all the impact and numbers that you want. People aren't necessarily going to remember those. They're going to remember that feeling of that story that you told. Or that, that's truthful. So, and authentic. So just basically just building up our storytelling, which, operating in a virtual environment is challenging. So I have to create opportunities to capture the story or have interviews and send people and do all these things that, on a lower budget, but we're getting it done. And so, just have to have an intentional effort to figure out ways to showcase or highlight the impact in different ways. It's not always just through numbers.
100%. That really speaks to what we heard from our Meet the Funders panel last week, right? So we were hosted by Camillus. Thank you, Christine. And we had Kitty Dumas from Writer. We had Joelle Allen from Peacock Foundation. And then we had Ceci, program officer from the DeLuca Foundation. And that's what we heard a lot about, right? So like one, it's having that authentic voice. So when you're talking to them, make sure, and they want to keep it real, which is something that I think I saw several times featured here within the book, right? So it's like warts and all. I want to see all of it. I want you to keep it real with me and have real, authentic, honest conversations so that we can turn around and then, invest in those solutions and join the party with you. We want to be a part of the solution. And they can only do that as next gen donors if they understand the entire and have the entire perspective in mind. Yeah, No, but I think we had a book earlier, The Seven Faces of Philanthropy. That was the first book in our book club series of the year. And it really does draw back to how people digest information. So some people are facts and figures people, some people are storytelling people, some people are images, some people you have to actually talk it through with them and have the one-on-ones and do the site visits. And so it's, again, just meeting them where they are. They're worth the time to invest, because they'll invest back in you. Thank you, Julie. Any other thoughts before we move on?
I'll just
Yes.
say just real quick that
Yeah.
that the this I think this is a real challenge, this is why we focused on that so much in the new preface to this book, is when we're out doing talks like this, talking to people reading the book. We heard this all the time, people say, well, yeah, I get that they want to see impact, but my problem is I've got one person that likes to see faces and hear stories, right? And I've got another person that wants to see a spreadsheet. And then we had people say, well, I'm in an organization where there's a highly confidential relationship between the staff and the clients. And they have these younger donors coming in and saying, hey, we want to be there and see the clients and how they're being helped. And well, you can't. So there are these sort of difficulties that emerge, because it sounds great to say the next generation is obsessed with creating more impact and moving the needle. They don't just want to, give money because that's what they're supposed to do. They want to give money that actually creates big change. That sounds great but then you realize there are consequences, especially for fundraisers and development folks, for how do you show that impact when everybody seems to want it in a different way. You can't just do the one big video at the gala every year and that's you're showing your impact. It's different for different organizations. And so I think where we came down, if you look in those recommendations, one of them was they just have the impact conversation, because it could be that the impact that they can see is a new computer system, right, for the organization, or they hire a staff person based on your gift, right? That you can't show them the faces of kids in a classroom like some other nonprofit can, but you can talk to them about, this is the impact that we're going for, and from point A to point B, we did with your gift this impact. So you have the impact conversation. So there's sort of a way around it, but it's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
So.
And I think bandwidth too, right? So like the staff also trying to set all these different forms of communication and reporting, but the second book that we read in the book club series is The Generosity Crisis with Nathan Chappell and others. And Nathan was with us a couple months ago. And, again, we talked about needing radical connection. And I think, Michael, what you're talking about is communicating openly and honestly and being really thoughtful about the communications that we're having with our donors and touching on the impact.
I will say, as somebody who teaches folks that are going to go out and be nonprofit program folks, fundraisers, right? That I teach people who are going to work in these roles. We don't necessarily prioritize teaching them be super candid with your major donors, right? Principle number one of major donor fundraising: tell them all the problems that you're having, and and what you're trying to, what didn't work last year, why when the money that they give you didn't produce the results that you wanted. But that's what they want, right? That and for the most part, they want to see a plan for making things better. But it's very hard to train to get people as fundraisers and nonprofit professionals to think like in the candid space, to think like like they're telling their problems and asking for help with those problems. But that ask for help, it's not just giving a litany of problems and saying, woe is me, we can't figure it out. You say, can you come with us and try to fix this with us? Give us your talent as well as your time and your treasure to try to figure this out. But that's hard, because that's not what you get a master's in nonprofits for.
Yeah, for sure.
Certified, you don't get your CFRE by, training you how to tell bad news to big donors.
Well, but maybe that's part of where we need to go, right? So like at this panel last week, the panelists were terribly candid with us. I mean, they really like they pulled back the curtain and they were giving us all sorts of like really great intel. And afterwards I talked to Ceci and I said, listen, like this was really phenomenal. Like I think the organizations that were here today, there were, you know, like 80 people in the room. These organizations are walking out with like a treasure trove here because you really got down to brass tacks. Like you're telling us how you want us to communicate with you. You're telling us you yourself are being candid and saying things that we might not typically hear in grantor meetings. And her response was, you know, one, she felt comfortable in the space to be able for all of them to be able to speak frankly, but also because there is a revolution happening in philanthropy and they want to give us the permission to have these kinds of conversations with them, which I thought was really, it's really refreshing. Like that's, you know,
Well,
we're doing
it helps them with their own strategy because she was mentioning that it's hard for them to measure impact across so many different grantees. So by them knowing what the challenges are, because they do send surveys and you fill them out, and I think they're trying to do some sort of baseline or benchmarking, and it's helpful for them to understand where they need to steward their funding. So yeah, it was really, really, but I don't think everybody's like that. And like you said, it is revolutionary. And if more of them were like that, then it would be, you know, better for everybody.
Yeah. I will say though, and Michael, I don't remember who said it in one of the passages, but it was, you know, one of the donors who said she uh, likes to get involved and to ask questions, but it's like almost apologetically because she doesn't want it to feel like the check is looming over the organization's head.
Yeah, holding a check over your head was the phrase that he used. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, that's the kind of subtlety of the relationship dynamic that, because as you know, in other parts of the book, we talk a lot about how much they focus on relationships. That's what they want. They use the language of relationships, and they want those to be candid and truthful and meaningful and all of that. So the positive is that they are more aware, at least those who have been involved. There is a little bit of a problem with especially folks coming from the tech sector or the finance sector, or those who made a lot of money at a young age. That was that bull in the china shop kind of problem. They come in and they're overconfident and they want to tell you what to do because they clearly know how to do everything because they made a lot of money when they were young. And so there is that challenge. But for the most part, when you talk to them about these relationship dynamics and about power dynamics in the funder, you know, grantee kind of relationships, they get it a bit better. And they certainly, by wanting to be involved hands-on and build that relationship, they are sensitive to the fact that if those questions come up, then they'll come to realize, oh, this kind of feels for you like I'm holding a check over your head. Let me clarify that I'm not doing that, right? Or they're trying to, so there's a sensitivity that some of them, they have to learn it because they come in the bull in the china shop, but others, I think in general, generationally, they have a sensitivity to that because that comes from wanting to be there and partnering. It just all reminds me also, I gave a talk based on the book early on in Jacksonville with the Community Foundation. And somebody in the room who was a nonprofit person, a grantee of the foundation, they said, my big problem with the younger donors as an advancement person is that they all want to build their primary relationship with the program staff. They don't want their primary relationship to be with me, major gifts officer. They want it to be with the people that can talk to them about the actual impact that they're achieving. And that means that my whole job of building relationship with major donors is made more difficult by they don't want to just go to lunch with me. They want to meet and invite along the program person, or they want to just meet with them, come into the office and hang out. So there's pros and cons of that, desiring that deep relationship and being sensitive to wanting to be there. So, yeah.
So we are already starting to run short on time because time flies when you're having fun. But there are a couple of questions that I wanted to get everyone's feedback on before we go. This one kind of goes along with what we've been talking about here, right? Next gen donors believe that just writing checks constitutes bad philanthropy. And strikingly, many of them consider their time to a cause to be more valuable than giving their money, even though they have money to give. Do you agree? And which do you consider when you personally give? So it's a twofer here. So one is to talk about, because I'm sure we have all heard this. I know I have heard it multiple times, right? I just don't want to write the check. I want to be involved. I want to engage. I want to volunteer. I want to be a part of it. I want to see, right? So it speaks to everything that we've been talking about. So, do you think the volunteerism, the engagement, the relationship is more valuable than the money as the professional? And then also personally, when you give, how do you give back to your charities of choice, whatever they may be? Christine, I saw you unmute. Oh, wait, we can't hear you though.
Excuse me, I'm in the middle of an electrical storm. I may lose you, and I apologize if it happens.
Okay, no problem. Please be safe. We'll let you back in if you're interrupted.
So I feel like, and I mean, I'm sure this is indicative. So when people, I guess, volunteer, I find, and I'm sure that when they start volunteering, the check will, and the donation inevitably comes, and it comes much greater than if they didn't. So I see that regularly. And then I think I answered the question. I don't know if I didn't. And then myself, at how I act as a donor, I think a lot of times when I give, I trust that they are the experts and they'll use the funds in the right way. And it makes sense for me to volunteer and engage as a donor. I will become more involved. Like hence serving on AFP Miami's board.
She says that because she's president-elect. Thank you, Christine. Yeah, you did answer the question, both pieces, which I appreciate there. So yeah, whether or not having them volunteer is even more valuable than the money, because, again, if they volunteer and they get to see things and they get engaged and they're seeing the real outlook and the impact, they are more likely to give financial gifts. Thank you, Jody, so much for joining us. Have a great one. Yeah, no, but I'm just curious, do we find the volunteerism to be more valuable? What if we don't have enough volunteer opportunities? Julie, you mentioned a lot about being remote. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, well, actually, sorry, I meant to clarify. The staff is remote, as are our volunteers, but we're primarily powered by the volunteers who are the coaches. They're college and career coaches. So it actually works out. But it's more of like getting back to the pre-pandemic engagement level, so that things that are outside of the mentoring, like, sometimes people just want to like do something ad hoc, not have the level of, because our coaches are engaged for about a year. So
Oh, wow, so it's quite a commitment.
Quite a commitment. So, so creating opportunities where we can have them be engaged for a little bit less of time. One day things are not easy. So I'm hosting a trivia night. Yeah. So I'm hosting a trivia night. It's our, annual fundraiser, which we haven't had in 5 years. It's going to be next month. There we have an opportunity for a one-day thing, but yeah, it's just everybody's so different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, so you've got opportunities that are typically baked, but then also when you're looking for special opportunities for the volunteers, or I'm sorry, for donors or prospects, then also, and it said it in the book, but this goes back to the authenticity of the organization and of the relationship manager. If you're just doing the dog and pony show, right? Like if you're doing a volunteer activity, but it's not really to the heart of it, folks can sniff that out. And so that's not going to go well for you. So then don't waste anyone's time doing that. So it's also about a timing thing too, right? To be mindful and to provide the opportunities as they become available or as you are able to do. within the bandwidth of the organization, I think. Okay, we've got 5 minutes. Michael, I'm looking at you first, buddy, because I think this is a very, very real thing that we're dealing with here. What challenges, trends, or problems worry you about the philanthropic and nonprofit sector today? You mentioned a report that came out yesterday, which I'd love for you to touch on. And then also, of course, Giving USA, $557.16 billion. Amazing. We went up by almost 2%, but once adjusted for inflation, we're actually down. So,
Yeah.
we're seeing these trends that we're starting to to go in a downward direction. That's still an incredible amount of money to be talking about, but really,
Yeah.
let's peel that back a little bit, please.
Yeah, I'll just say, and I'll say it in the context of the next generation, and back to the issue. I know, I think it was Christine, maybe it was Jody, that mentioned this issue about the segmentation between those that are major donors of the next generation and those that are sort of everyday donors. That's the word that the Generosity Commission does, because it does relate. This book is really about those that can be major donors, but there's a bigger issue with so the first and the Generosity Commission, just so you know what that is, what I was talking about. You probably followed this, but that the problem that they're addressing, and they created a whole commission, and they came out with their big report yesterday with a bunch of recommendations, one of which was youth focused. They are addressing the problem that everyday donors, those that are sort of when we measure households who give in traditional ways, like giving to 501c3 nonprofits, that has gone down precipitously, the number of households who do that in the last 20 years, 15 years. I mean, the way I always put it is, if you take 5 families that were giving 20 years ago, one of those families doesn't give anymore. It's gone down that much, and it can continue to do that. And same thing for volunteering. So we have this generosity crisis, as you talked about it before, and the Generosity Commission was trying to say, let's research it, find out why it's happening, and let's talk about what we can do. And it relates very specifically to the next gen, because those problems are more acute for younger people than they are for older people. And it doesn't mean, though, and I think people acknowledge this, that the younger people are not interested in creating change, or they're apathetic. They don't care about other people, or care about, fixing injustice or preserving the environment, or whatever it is that they might care about. They just don't see giving gifts to 501c3 nonprofits as the primary only means to do that. We see this with the Millennial Impact Report, which is another long-standing report that you might have seen, that covers everybody, range of people on the economic spectrum. When they ask them, how do you want to make change in the world? They want to, they list off a few things. I want to work for a triple bottom line company. I want to, work for a political campaign. I want to crowdfund, all these. I want to be involved in I want to be a conscious consumer and buy fair trade coffee, all the stuff. And then they say, I may also want to volunteer or give to a nonprofit. So that's a big challenge. And it's coupled with the idea that the next generation of major donors who do have significant amounts to give and will continue to be an even bigger part of that Giving USA pie of the for charity goes to major donors are a bigger part of that than they ever been. And the next gen will continue that. We know that because they've got so many resources to give, that they too want to give in different ways. And so you've got these sort of double challenges. I hate to be so glum, but these double challenges for fundraisers in the next 20 years of, your major donors they want you to engage them in a completely new way. And they want to take risks and innovate and all these things, see the impact and all that stuff. That's hard. That's a lot of work. And then the non-major donors that you still want to be engaged because they may become major donors, or they're your bread and butter, they're less and less inclined in a fairly crisis kind of way with giving generous. So you got to figure out ways of with giving to nonprofits. You got to figure out ways of engaging them so they still see giving to you and your nonprofit as a way of doing good in the world, rather than doing something through the market or supporting a B corporation or whatever other options they've got. So I think we have a lot of good ideas. Our school's doing this. Generosity Commission were trying to come up with ideas for addressing this, but a lot of the burden is on everyday, frontline fundraisers trying to fix, trying to address the problem. It's much harder to be a fundraiser now and for the next 20 years than it was for the last 50.
Yeah. I'm glad you're recording this.
So
Yes, please pass this on accordingly. But it's incredible. It feels like the sector is at a crossroads right now. It was really jarring to hear and to read in the Generosity Crisis book that businesses fare higher in the trust-o-meter than nonprofits for the first time. And again, God bless them, right? Like for-profit folks are taking full advantage and kind of leveraging the space of nonprofit and talking about, fair trade goods and, you buy one, you give one, all that kind of good stuff. And that's great. But what's interesting is that paradigm shift that people see that as philanthropy, as opposed to the more traditional routes. Like there are so many more ways. I was talking with a colleague today and he says he was overwhelmed with his phone because he has donors that talk to him on Instagram, Facebook Messenger, emails, Snapchat, WhatsApp, like there are so many different ways in which to reach him. He spends half his time trying to figure out where he saw that message.
Right.
Like, okay, I got to call back Melissa, but where was that again? Right. So you see that too, Julie. So it's like,
and that's just with my boss. LinkedIn.
yeah.
So the choices, so it's almost like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. And so that's become like the way in which people see that their giving is too. There's so many ways in which for them to accomplish their personal mission to see that impact. And so like, that's where we have to try to figure things out. So I made some notes here, Michael. Thank you. I'm going to go searching so that we can share some resources with our folks along with this recording. I also in the chat, guys, I downloaded the Tableau from Giving USA this year. So please, by all means, nab that. That's a free resource online. We are out of time, but before we go, Michael, any last thoughts or any musings to kind of leave this core group with tonight?
Yeah, I guess I would just follow up on what I just said, which was, so we don't leave on the note of things are really hard and charity's going away. Because I don't think it is. I think, and I think there are things that we can do to address that. I think we need to embrace some of these changes and find ways of using them to our advantage, right? It just takes work. This idea that, that Mark Zuckerberg and his wife still give massive amounts of money to charity. They just do that from the context of a LLC that also invests in companies and gives to political campaigns and all this other stuff. They're still making big gifts to medical research and stuff. It's just they talk a different language and right and your competitors are different. And so there's promise there, there's opportunity there for doing things in a new way. But and I would, as an educator, of course, I would say getting, we as the people who do education for those who work in this field need to change how we do our education, right? We can't just teach the fundraising school here at the Lilly Family School. We can't teach those certificate of fundraising courses in the same way anymore. You've got to adapt. But it's an adaptation that the positive which comes out of this book is that we mentioned that we're cautiously optimistic. We're optimistic because there's still a generation of young people that want to change the world. They aren't apathetic. They want to, line up their values and all of their assets. They're fundamentally changing the investment world, right? Social responsible investing, ESG, impact investing, all that. So there's massive change that they're bringing. We've just got to, it's just maybe not in the ways that we've expected it. I mean, it would be easy for us to just continue. So we've just got to find those places where there's opportunity to take advantage of the trends and to defend why giving to charity still, traditional charity is still one of those valuable ways of doing it. And I think we can do that. We just got to got a big task. So I wanted to give some hope despite all the challenges.
So thank you absolutely for that. I will leave you guys with, I was listening to a podcast episode about having hope in a cynical world. And it talked about the difference between someone who is optimistic versus hope. If you are optimistic, then you are, expecting for things to work out, but it's in a very passive seat, as opposed to hope gives you the agency and impetus to create a better life as you see
Yeah.
fit. And that is the opportunity for our nonprofits in Miami and beyond. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Michael, for being with us and being a part of it.
Thanks for reading the book. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
no, it was absolutely great, a great resource. Looking forward to the next edition as you
Me too.
continue your research, and we'll keep on moving, guys. Thank you.
right.
Have a great one.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you
Okay,
so
great.
much.